Your source for everything paranormal. Parax.
Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. You probably know it by now, but we're the only show where we speak to the guests that have passed. And we're brought to you every week on Sundays by the Parax Radio Network. I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I will be doing the channeling tonight.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host, and I would like to thank you for tuning into our show this evening. Tonight we'll be talking to the spirit of Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the United States. I suspect many of you have seen his play. I'm sure you're going to find out that he was a very interesting and heroic individual. As usual, we have prepared questions for our guest tonight, but we always appreciate questions in the chat room, and I do try to get in as many as I can.
And we also always give a small disclaimer when we begin, because we have no idea what the answers are going to be ahead of time. So the opinions or statements voiced and are sure the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the Parax Network or of our sponsors.
Okay, if you've listened to our show, you do know that Channeling History is very different from the other shows because we only speak to spirits that have contributed to historic events or are the Holy Spirits or Archangels. Last week, we interviewed the soul of Colin Powell. We discussed many things, including the war in Europe. He is a true patriot, and you will find his answers quite interesting. If you missed it, the show is available on our YouTube channel.
In our future shows, we prefer to interview spirits as recommended by our listeners. So please submit any suggestions for future shows or questions for our spirit guests to our email. It's channelinghistoryon@parax@gmail.com. That's channelinghistoryon@parax@gmail.com. If you've listened to any of our shows, you'll know that before we channel, we always start with a prayer of protection. There's a lot of evil out there, and we want to make sure that we're protected when we open the channel to the other side. So Connie will say the prayer, and then we will begin with our channeling of Mr. Hamilton.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God. Okay, welcome, Alexander. I really appreciate your coming. Would you like to begin with a message?
Yes, I would. In my time, things were very up in the air. The country was just being formed. There were many, many ideas of how the country should be established. It was a time of great misunderstandings among all the different states. It was very, very difficult to get anybody to agree on anything. The Southerners were very pro-slavery. The Northerners had many different opinions. The cities were trying to control the country. Our country was incredibly rural at that time, and there were just many, many ways that we could have gone with the Declaration of Independence and with our Constitution. It was a very, very difficult time. King George was running the country like it was a fiefdom. We were trying to get our freedoms from them. They were very brutal. They cared little about what the Americans thought. It was indeed a very difficult time. The war was very long. It was very difficult, and thank goodness that we managed to win. I did my best that I could with the help of many others. There were many patriots. There were many that were willing to give their lives for freedom. It was an amazing time, and I was very honored to have been chosen to live during that time. So, I hope that my questions will be of service to many, my answers, that is. I am ready. So, Connie, why don't we begin with the questions?
Okay, let's start out with when you were born. Were you born in 1755 or 1757?
Actually, I was born in 1757. My early years were very difficult, and I wanted to be able to appear as old as I could so that I could get work. So I had to lie about my age and do many things. But I was actually born in 1757.
Okay. Tell us about your mother, Rachel.
My mother was a very, very loving person. She married and then fell in love with another individual. She tried to do her best. She was a good mother. She showed us love. She taught us about God. Unfortunately, she didn't live for a long period of time because in those days there were many things that could take your life. But she was a very good person, and I still see her over here on this side.
Okay, she died in 1768 of yellow fever. How did that affect the rest of your life?
We were on our own. I was basically orphaned at that point. I had friends. I had other members of the family that took me in and tried to do the best they could for me. But it was a very, very difficult time for me. I had to try to earn my own way. I realized that I needed to go to the continent of America. We were living in the islands at the time. So I went to what was to become the United States, and it was one of the best decisions that I ever did.
It's good for a lot of us. Could you tell us about your education?
My education was very difficult. My father had a lot of books, and I did manage to read as many of these books as I could. But mainly, I was forced to try to educate myself. I was not trying to blow my own horn, but I was a fairly intelligent person, and things that I read would stick with me. My education was just basically what I could manage on my own.
Well, you did a fine job. In 1775, British and American forces fought at Lexington and Concord. How did that affect you?
I realized that it was time that I needed to fight for my country. I I joined a militia. I, I volunteered to fight. I was originally part of an infantry company. We saw early service in the Revolutionary War against the British. I realized as soon as I got into the Army that I really enjoyed the military life. I studied military tactics on my own, and I became a very successful commander. My men trusted me. My commanding officers promoted me, and it was a very, very good life.
Yeah, tell us about how you obtained your cannon when you were in the artillery company.
We actually overran a British position, and we took their cannons. The Americans didn't have a lot of armament in the beginning, so we would try to ambush or overrun British positions where they had artillery. My infantry unit took over multiple guns from the British. We learned to use them, and since we had the guns, we became an artillery company.
How did you learn all the military tactics?
I had to study them on my own. Keep in mind, in those days, there were no military academies in the country. People were very rural. There was really no formal army when we began. The Revolutionary Army basically started out with a bunch of militia that were organized from the different states. They were poorly trained in the beginning. There really wasn't a lot of order. General Washington took over and attempted to bring order to his troops. Von Steuben came in during the winter in Philadelphia at Valley Forge. He played a great role in establishing a professional military. He taught the boys how to really fight. He understood the British, and he played a very important role in our revolution.
Okay, you served as an aide to General George Washington. What was it like to serve with him?
General Washington was an incredible individual. He literally sacrificed everything in of his personal earnings and everything that he had in order to lead the armies. Keep in mind, this was an incredibly long war. It stretched out for many years. It was not until after 7, 8 years that things really started to settle down. He was a very fair individual. He was very bright, and he knew military tactics. He had actually served in the British Army in the French and Indian Wars. He knew their tactics, and he was very good at getting information about the British troops. He set up an intelligence system of spies, and he did many things. There's no doubt that without George, I don't think we could have won the war.
What role did you play on his staff?
He trusted me explicitly, and I became one of his chief advisors. I did a lot to pass down orders to his commanders. I helped him discuss strategies. I did much. He considered me a very important member of his military staff.
So why did you leave his staff in 1781?
Believe it or not, I actually enjoyed the battles that I'd participated in. It was an adrenaline rush for me, and I wanted to get back to an active military career. George definitely did not want me to leave, but I sensed that things were changing in the war. The French were coming in to help us at that time, and I truly wanted to get back into active military leadership. He finally relented and gave me a command position, and I was fortunate enough to be at Yorktown.
Yeah, tell us about your participation in the Battle of Yorktown.
The French had cut off the British Navy, and we knew that we had them surrounded at Yorktown. The British had had plenty of time to build fortifications. They had forts that they had constructed. They referred to them as redoubt, and they used them as an interlocking system of crossfire to protect their defenses. I was given command of the forces that attacked one of their main facilities. It was known as Redoubt Number 10. We stormed the facility and we took it over, and it was instrumental in bringing about the surrender of the British at Yorktown.
What was your opinion of the Continental Congress?
I had a very low opinion of Congress. Many of them would not make definitive decisions. They had not supported many of the troops. In many instances, they were not able to pay the troops that they had promised to pay. I felt that Congress could have been much more supportive of the Army. As I said earlier, there were so many differences in our country that it was reflected in the Congress. But keep in mind, they were doing everything for the first time. They had never fought a war before. They had never made decisions on how to finance armies, how to supply them. So there were many reasons that they were not as effective as they should have been. But those of us who were trying to fight the war were often quite critical.
Why did you think our country needed a strong national government?
Our country in those days was very rural. There were cities, but they were not large population centers. It was a time that I felt that if the government was going to succeed to beat the powerhouse British Army, that they needed a central government. We were supposed to be known as the United States. We were very far from being united in different opinions. I felt that we needed a strong president. I felt that we needed representatives that would be able to make decisions that were oriented towards the entirety of the country and not just towards the states.
Now that you're on the other side, what do you think of our current central government?
I cannot believe that government has grown to the size that it has today. Government has grown so much that I don't think there's anybody that really knows what is going on. Congress has become so solidified in their opinions that there's really not much taking place. In many ways, I think you can compare our current Congress to the Continental Congress during our war. They had problems getting along and making decisions. And as you well know, it is very difficult for anyone to make a decision in your current governmental system.
Our first government served under the Articles of Confederation. What was your opinion of the Articles of Confederation?
I thought they were a good start. I thought that the Articles would lay a foundation for a strong government. I also knew that it was going to be necessary that in the future they would reconstruct their documents, that they would establish a strong constitution. The Articles were very adequate for their time, but as the country started to consolidate and grow, we all knew that there would have to be radical changes in the governing system if it was going to succeed against all the world powers.
Okay, what were the Federalist Papers?
I was a strong Federalist. My party was the Federalist Party. I tried to lay out arguments as to how I felt that future government should be taking place in the United States. Keep in mind that it was a time that we were feeling our way in government. I felt very strongly that there should be a central bank, that there should be a consolidation of power in the cities. There were many from rural states that felt that states' rights should be stronger than the rights of a central government. I tried to lay out all the arguments for why a strong federal government was required in order for the future growth of the country. The papers laid out the arguments that I felt were very important. They are still actually a guideline of reference to many articles of the Constitution.
Okay, you mentioned the central bank. One of our listeners would like to know, would you, looking the way things are today, would you still have proposed the central bank?
Yes, in my day, we needed to have a central bank. We needed to control the monetary systems. We needed to be able to handle the country's debt. And the only way that that could take place, in my opinion, was through a central bank. And I did as much as I could to establish it. Today, things are changing. You now have a Federal Reserve. And there are times as we watch over here, from over here, that we question some of the policies and some of the intent of the Federal Reserve. I felt that the banking system had to be pretty much separated from political policy. Today you're finding out that it is impossible to separate anything from politics. The country has become so polarized that everything has to do with political decisions. I do think that there are changes that should be made in the federal banking system. I think that there have been many abuses of the banking system through the years. But in my day, I feel that what we did was vital for the continuation of the country.
Okay, the new Constitution took effect in 1788. Why did it take so long to formulate a constitution?
12 years elapsed from the time of the Declaration of Independence until a constitution could be adopted. There were many, many differences of opinion in how the country should be run. The representatives of the cities felt one thing. The representatives of rural areas felt another thing. It was very difficult to get the representatives to agree on anything. We decided on 3 branches of government. We put into the Constitution what we thought would be effective and what we could get people to agree upon. It was not a totally satisfactory document. We had to add amendments to it, but it was a document derived from individuals being forced to compromise and to agree. I wish that some of the ideas that we came up with to make the country work would have carried over to your modern governing bodies. As we watch from over here, we get the opinion that the country is divided as it was when we tried to make the Constitution.
Probably right. How did the government fund the Revolutionary War?
They borrowed money from France. Bear in mind, there was no taxation system at the time. The government actually made bonds that individuals would buy. The government would take the money from those bonds and they would use it for the military and to fund the government. The bonds, many thought, would become worthless. There were times that there was no money to give to the soldiers, and they would give them these bonds. They would, in order to support their families, they would often sell these bonds at discounted prices. It was very, very difficult. There was no income tax in those days, and it was a time where people really did not know totally how to raise money and to eliminate debt. That was one reason why I felt that the strong central bank that would take over the monetary system, that would provide funding for the government, would make sinking funds to get rid of the debt that had been accumulated during the war. I think that my concepts of the banking system were really one of the major reasons why the country succeeded.
What was your opinion on slavery at the time?
Keep in mind at the time that slavery was very prevalent. Many of the important leaders of our government were from slave-owning states. I personally did not agree with slavery. I never owned a slave. I was not a person that felt that an individual should be indebted to another. And I felt basically that all men were created equal.
You were instrumental in creating the U.S. Mint in 1792. Why did you feel a national currency was important?
At the time, there was no system. States were printing their own money. Many of the individuals were using Spanish money. I felt that in order for any country to exist, that they needed to have a currency of their own, that the currency had to be stable, that it had to maintain its value, and in many instances, it had to be backed by both silver and gold. I established the mint so that the United States would have its own currency, that it would maintain its value, and that it would be a basis for the country to thrive into the future.
Okay, one of our listeners would like to know if you support federal income tax now.
With the size of government and all of the requirements for military protection, I really do not see many alternatives to an income tax. I do know that there are those that would tax the value of items that you would purchase. Perhaps that's a sound way to do it. There are many inequalities in your income taxing system that I think should be investigated and changed. For the current way that funds are required. I believe that the federal income tax may have very few alternatives.
Okay. Could you tell us about the Whiskey Rebellion?
One way we tried to raise money was through taxing alcohol and whiskey. That was fine for imports, but what we didn't fully understand was just how many rural areas were making their own alcoholic drinks. When we tried to tax those rural areas, we had a real problem. The people were very unhappy about the tax. They threatened to rebel over it, and we almost had a very volatile situation. We used the army to threaten the people, and we did manage to avoid great violence. Okay, let's take a little break here. We will be back in a short period of time.
Channeling History will return right after these brief messages.
In order for the light to shine so brightly, the darkness must be present. Tune in every Monday at 10 o'clock. The Dark Sun Rising on the Para-X Radio Network.
Hi, this is Marla Brooks from Stir in the Cauldron. Thursdays are a great night on the Para-X Radio Network. We start off the evening with Journey into the Light, Chapter 3, with your hosts, Psychic Little T and Tabby Cat Gash at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then, on the first and third Thursdays of the month at 8 p.m., it's Tango and Friends, hosted by Bruce Tango. And on the alternate Thursdays at 8 p.m., tune in to Stir in the Cauldron, the archive podcast. Every week at 9 p.m. Eastern, join me on Stir in the Cauldron Live. And then at 10 p.m., stick around for New Aeon Now with Lily Alley, Davron Michaels, and Christine Matza. Finally, to round out the night, join Dr. Kelly Renee Schutz on the Paranormal Encounters podcast. All this every Thursday, right here on Para-X.
Have you ever wondered what Jesus and his followers would say if you could receive their messages today? In his new book, Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits, channeler and author Barry Strohm answers those questions for you. Using his gift of spirit communication, he brings you messages from such Holy Spirits as Moses, John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, Jesus, and even Mother Teresa and the Reverend Billy Graham. They discuss topics that are important for contemporary life in these troubled times. Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Signed copies are available on the author's website, spiritspredict.com. After reading this book, you will never again say, "What would Jesus say or do?" Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Connie, let's go on with the questions.
Okay, Alexander, you were a firm believer in paying down the national debt. What's your opinion of the national debt today?
My opinion is that if people do not bring down the national debt, that it will destroy the country. You're creating a problem for your children and grandchildren that they will not be able to solve. There is an incredible amount of waste in your current amounts of funds that you're spending. People need to reassess what the priorities are. Obviously, you need a strong defense, especially with what is taking place in Europe. But individuals have got to use the funds wisely. If you consider growing the debt at this rate, there's no way that the country can thrive into the future.
Yeah, could you tell us about Maria Reynolds?
That is a question that I was hoping wouldn't come up. Maria was a beautiful woman, and I did not behave towards her with honor. I was married at the time, and I had an affair with her. There were many problems with what I did. I was set up. Her husband knew what was taking place, and he came to me for money. I foolishly paid the funds, and we continued the relationship for almost a year. It was one of the most stupid things I ever did in my life, and I paid dearly for it.
What was in the pamphlet?
I was being accused of financial improprieties because of my position with the central bank. They were saying that I had used federal monies in order to pay Mariah's husband. I felt that the only way that I could defend my honor in this, at least my honesty, was to lay out all the details of what had taken place. Sadly, it ruined my political career. I feel that I could have been president. I paid dearly for what I did. I wish that I'd never done it, but the way I chose to answer my critics was to lay out the truth of what had taken place.
What role did James Monroe play in that incident?
I had told not many, but I told 3 individuals, of which Monroe was one of them, of what had taken place. They had promised not to tell others, that they felt that my impropriety was my own problem. Monroe did not live up to his obligation and helped make the incident public.
How'd you get along with John Adams?
There were times I agreed with him, and there were times I totally disagreed with him. I felt that many of his ideas were weak. I felt that there were many ways that he could have done a better job.
Tell us about the presidential election of 1800, in which Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr were tied in the electoral vote.
The election of 1800 was incredibly close. When it came down to the electoral vote, Jefferson and Burr were tied. There were over 30 different ballots, and no progress was being made. I threw my support to Jefferson, although he and I had had many, many differences in the past. And when I did that, the votes became available, and Jefferson beat Burr. Burr became the vice president because in those days, the person with the second number of electoral votes would be vice president.
Why did you dislike Aaron Burr?
I thought that he was an arrogant person. I felt that he was in politics for his own political gains. I felt that he was not an individual that could be trusted to be president of the United States.
Did you insult his honor?
I did say things that were not complimentary about him, especially as we were trying to solve the presidential issue of 1800.
Okay, you ended up with a duel. Had you been involved in duels before? And who fired first?
I had been involved with duels before. I had a very strong feeling about personal honor. I thought that even though duels were not a great way of solving issues, I felt because of the times, individuals would go to great extremes to protect their honor. I had been seconds in duels, and I had been involved with others that we had been managed to work out the issues and create an apology before it came to the actual act of shooting at one another. I could not reach an understanding with Burr. He was very difficult. He had his mind made up that there would be no apologies accepted. He wanted to have the duel. We reached a point where there was no way that I could back out of it and maintain my honor. We were given our pistols, and I felt that it was not the proper thing to do. When it came time to fire, I hesitated, and he fired first. He hit me in the abdomen, and I fired over his head and missed him. It was a difficult way to pass, and as I look back at it, I wish that we had handled things differently.
Did you intentionally fire to miss him?
No, he fired first, and when I recoiled from the impact of the bullet, I jerked and missed him.
Do you see Aaron Burr now that he's on the other side?
We have seen each other and we've spoken over here. As you know, we're not supposed to show any hatreds, but we still have a genuine dislike for one another, so we avoid each other.
Okay, got another quick question from the chat room. Should the U.S. have gone off the gold standard? And also, is the gold still at Fort Knox?
I think it would have been better if we had maintained the gold standard. I understand all the problems with the size of the economy and the size of government. There is still some gold in Fort Knox. There's not as much as people believe, but we do still have a supply of gold.
Okay, what was your belief concerning God?
I always felt very strongly that God existed. I prayed to him. I would ask for guidance. I would do my own thing personally. I drew away from organized religions. Part of it was that during the war we were so involved. We would pray. I prayed every day of my life. I know now that I'm over here that God truly does exist. And I am happy to say that I believed in him throughout my life.
Very good. Another question out of our chat room. What happened to your brother James?
James was a very independent person. He did some things that I did not approve of. He went on to have problems. I wish that he had paid more attention to my recommendations.
Okay, was your mother Jewish?
No, she was not Jewish.
What was your belief about the Jewish community?
In those days, the Jewish traders were very, very successful. The Jewish people were great businessmen, and members of the Jewish faith held many positions of power. Being a banker and trying to work things out financially, I would often rely on information that was given to me by members of the Jewish community. They were generally excellent businessmen and had a true understanding of debt. They were not afraid to make money off of lending, but I always thought that the Jewish people were exceptional business people and were to be admired.
As a Federalist, you continuously took the side of greater federal power at the expense of the states. If you were alive today, would you have the same opinion?
I would have mellowed in that opinion. I'm seeing that the federal government is trying to eliminate a lot of power of the states. Your cities have grown to such an extent that the large cities would truly have the ability to control a true democracy. I feel that state rights have got to be preserved. You still have many rural areas and states that do not have large populations. While that is changing, those states are still very, very important. They provide a lot of minerals, they provide food. The rural people now are becoming a minority. In my day, rural people were a majority. Their rights have got to be preserved. While in my time I felt that a strong central government was absolute, today I feel that there has to be a softening and that the powers of states have got to be respected. The governors of states realize the problems of those individual units. The federal government often does not understand specific problems. Government has grown so big that it is very possible to overrun the rights of many.
Why did you help draft the Federalist Papers?
I wanted to define exactly what I felt federalism was. I wanted to describe exactly why I felt the Constitution was written the way it was, and I wanted people to truly understand just how important a central constitution, a strong constitution, would be for the future of the history of the government.
John Adams and Thomas Jefferson viewed you as an unprincipled and dangerously aristocratic. Did they have reason for their belief?
I will admit that there were times that I certainly gave that opinion to others. I felt that I was a very principled individual. I did what I felt was necessary to preserve the country and to give it a foundation upon which it could thrive into the future. Adams and Jefferson had many different opinions from mine. They felt that a central bank was not important. They felt that states' rights were more important than those of the federal government. I felt that in order for a country to succeed, that there had to be a strong central government.
What's your opinion of the play Hamilton?
I didn't particularly care for it. In many instances, I didn't feel that it was historically accurate. while I like the music, I think that many of the ideas that the author portrayed in the play were not consistent with many of my concepts.
What's your opinion of the state of political parties today?
As I watch from this side, I'm totally disgusted. I cannot believe that there can be so much dissension among citizens of the country. All that the powerful individuals want to do in government today is gain more power. Many of the individuals are abusing that power to make personal wealth. There are radical individuals in both parties that it seems like could never agree on anything. We formed a government based on compromise. We had many arguments. We had so many differences of opinion. But common sense prevailed, and we came up with a constitution that survives today.
What do you consider your greatest accomplishment, Alexander?
I think my greatest accomplishment was establishing a banking and monetary system that laid the foundation for the government to thrive and to grow. I believe that if that system had not been accepted, that the government would have had a hard time existing through many of the troubled times that were ahead for them. It is only a government built on a strong financial foundation that can exist into the future. That is why I fear for what is happening financially with the incredible amount of debt that the country is assuming.
You also believed in protectionism and tariffs. Do you still think they're appropriate today?
I still think there are times that tariffs and protectionism are appropriate. The free enterprise system is far from being free. Government has put so many restrictions on many businesses that there are times that those businesses will need help to keep from failing. Tariffs, I always believed, could help a country and assure that they would be able to thrive into the future. And I still believe that there are times that they're appropriate.
Have you ever reincarnated since your time as Hamilton?
No, I have not come back since my time as Hamilton. I am thinking that perhaps there may be a time in the near future that I can return. I think that the government of the future is going to require all the help that it can get. Decisions being made today are definitely undermining the financial stability of the future of the United States. If there are not some strong individuals that will take a stand and demand that spending be accountable to the people, it's going to be a very, very difficult time.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do you have a final message for our listeners?
Yes, I would like to thank you for allowing me to come through. I hope that your generations, your current generations, understand that financial stability is a foundation that is required to last into the future. The debts that are currently being incurred are going to be a weight around all of your future generations. If those debts are not paid, you will be faced with incredible inflation, the common person is going to be the one to suffer from it. The rich could care less. They have so much money that they really don't care. But it is the average individual that is going to pay the price of the debt that is being currently run up in the United States. I would suggest that you elect individuals, irregardless of their parties, that understand their financial obligations, believe that the country needs sound financial management, and elect people that can compromise. We were forced into it, and we gave you a constitution that still lasts today. So thank you for allowing me to come in tonight. I appreciate that you took time to listen to me. I hope that you found out that I'm really not as crazy an individual as you thought. So goodbye, thank you, and should you ever wish to speak with me again, I would be more than happy to come forward.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, folks, next week we're going to interview the 33rd President of the United States, Harry Truman. I thought that it would be real interesting to speak to him. He was the first president to use an atomic weapon and the only person to use an atomic weapon. And we are currently being threatened by them with Russia, with everything that's happening today. So I thought it'd be very interesting to speak with him. You can submit questions or recommendations for future shows through our email. It's channelinghistoryoonparax@gmail.com. That's channelinghistoryoonparax@gmail.com. My new book, Channeling Spirit Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can pick it up on Kindle for $2.99. Signed copies are available on my website. And we're going to have a new book coming out in 3 or 4 months. And I hope that you guys will support it out there. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Thank you for listening. Please join us Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Parax Radio Network.
And I would also like to thank you all for joining us this evening. You all have a wonderful week, and God bless you.
History. Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.